Welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I will be talking to our senior analyst, Laurence Sanford, today on his paper on China in Mexico and the fentanyl problem. Larry?
Good afternoon. Mexico, fentanyl. 100,000 Americans are dying a year from drug overdoses, and the vast majority of these drug overdoses are from fentanyl, which are mixed in with other drugs. The fentanyl-based materials come from China. At one time, China was actually sending the fentanyl itself, but after a public outcry, they stopped direct shipments through one of the channels was the United States Postal Service. They stopped doing that, and now they just ship the bulk raw materials to Mexico, where they have a wonderful business relationship with the cartels. Mexican, and there are Chinese cartels in Mexico also. And this relationship is that China sends the raw materials, the precursors. The cartels manufacture it very cheaply, very easily, and since they have the existing distribution channels into the United States, they cart it up here into the U.S., sell it. Chinese money launderers grab the money with the cartels, funnel it through Chinese banks, restaurants, that then funnel it back into China and Mexico, billions of dollars a year.
And in your paper, as you state, not to interrupt you, but
Please do.
China doesn't have an issue with this because they look the other way. That's their policy, and so the cartels and the drugs continue to flow.
Well, the fentanyl serves two purposes for China. And one purpose, of course, is the money. The other purpose is that China's at war with the United States. There are unrestricted warfare, and the unrestricted warfare is that by flooding America with drugs, it weakens our culture and it weakens our people. People are dying, people get hooked on this, it affects our productivity. And in a way, the Chinese must be laughing by saying this is payback to the 1800s when the British and Japanese flooded China with opium from India. And when the Chinese authorities, in its last dynasty, when its dying dynasty was sort of on its last legs, fought the British and the French and the Japanese about this drug import from India. The British were importing it, the opium, to sell to China so that they could buy all the silks and ceramics from China. So it was a method for the British to buy product from China by selling opium. And the Chinese were not able to withstand, at that time in the 1800s, the military weapons of the West. And so as a result, the Chinese, when they engaged in warfare against the West, they lost. And so they had to sign what is called a series of unequal treaties. And in these treaties, for example, Hong Kong was ceded to the British and Taiwan was ceded to Japan. The Chinese have long memories, and since then, of course, they've taken back Hong Kong, and they're certainly on the way. It looks like they're going to be taking back Taiwan, even though prior to China controlling Taiwan, for approximately 200 years. Before that, Taiwan had been independent. So there's an argument to be made that for most of history, Taiwan was independent of China.
And going back to your to the fentanyl issue, now I say CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, was able to stop the opium at some point.
Well, they have a very effective law enforcement. They are very much, if you sell drugs, you're probably going to die. And if you use drugs, you're going to go to prison at best. So they're very effective. Plus they have social cohesion. They're very strong families. And of course in America, United States, the family unit is degenerating and loosening. And so we're much more susceptible to.
That was my next question. So how does America stop this fentanyl addiction problem? Because obviously that's fueling Mexico and China to continue to send it across the border.
Well, the easy answer is I don't know. I think certainly the war on poverty that was instituted back in the 60s during the Vietnam War by President Johnson. The war on poverty has been a total disaster. Trillions of dollars later, The poor are still poor, though the percentage is maybe less. And I would argue poverty's pretty well been diminished because of all the welfare programs. I mean, you talk about income of being $25,000, but these incomes that are reported in the statistics don't include the food stamps, don't include the housing allowances. So really, probably the low level for government assistance income is around $45,000 a year. So, you know, it's hard to equate a poverty in today's world with poverty of 60 or 70 years ago.
But that is a good point that you're making about poverty, because that could lead to a hopelessness feeling if you don't think you're getting anywhere. And it's certainly today with prices of houses, rents, inflation.
Yeah, well, but on the other hand, I could argue that poverty in China is a lot worse than it is here in America, and they don't have the drug problem. But
right.
they have the culture, yeah. They have the family. And the war on poverty broke up the American family. It subsidizes, it continues today, children born out of wedlock. And so back in the 65s, early 60s, the out of wedlock birth rate was around 20%. Now it's up around 70% for the black communities, 50% for the Hispanics, 30% for the whites, and like 10% for the Asians. So, and interestingly enough, you take those statistics of 10, 30, whatever the percentages are, you can inverse it for income. So the ethnic groups that have the lowest child rate out of wedlock have the highest income. So the Asian community, the Indians and the Chinese, are the highest per capita income group in America. And the lowest income group in America are the blacks, who have the highest rate of children out of wedlock.
Does that, do we have numbers, does that coincide with the fentanyl overdoses?
I have not seen any relationship to that, but it seems to, we talk about it all the time. Why do people take drugs? I don't know. It never has appealed to me, so I can't relate. I just don't know.
I mean, I understand some addictions come from injuries and stuff like that, and then there's others.
But once you get hooked on this stuff, it's very difficult.
And like you said, they think they're taking a different drug, and it's laced with fentanyl. So this is a big problem. I
read an article where the young go to parties in LA now, and they take with them the equivalent of Narcan in case they get hit with fentanyl. They get something right at the party to counter it. My only thought was, why take any drug at any party?
Even simple marijuana is now laced as, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Now going back to Mexico.
Oh yeah. So anyways.
China and you say in your paper, they have a lot of money put into Confucius Institutes to propagate their CCP policies in Mexican institutions and universities.
Yeah. It's all part of the unrestricted warfare. They're poisoning us, and then they're corrupting the world with their, I shouldn't say corrupting, they're pushing their political viewpoints on the world through Confucius Institutes, which are tied into institutes of higher education, university. At one time, there were over 100 Confucius Institutes in the United States, but so much outcry and corruption charges were made that now we're down to a handful of universities that have Confucius Institutes. But overseas, there hasn't been that outcry, and what they do is the Chinese, needless to say, subsidize. So the University of Mexico, for example, Confucius Institute, China will subsidize the teachers. They'll bring in their teachers. They'll bring in the materials to be taught. And needless to say, the materials being taught are favorable towards China and against Western civilization.
And even though the U.S. has managed to stop a lot of the Confucius Institutes, wouldn't you say that they're also doing this propagating through media platforms?
Yes. I mean, they take out advertisements in the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they have influences with our elite. And Peter Schweitzer's Red-Handed is one of my favorite books. He outlines pretty much how the Chinese have bought our elite at Wall Street and the media and in Congress. So this unrestricted warfare, you look around, they're there. The Chinese are there. And I shouldn't say Chinese, I should say the CCP. The Chinese Communist Party. I mean, I lived in Hong Kong for 2 years. I love living there, and I have very fond memories of it. And so it's not the Chinese peoples, it's the CCP.
And I'm sure a lot of the Chinese people don't agree with the CCP's policy.
Well, when I was there, it was a British colony, and my wife taught in school in a district of, and she had numerous stories of her students had fled communist China, swimming across, and how some of their associates and families died trying to escape from communist China.
That just shows you then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you don't see the millions of people coming into America trying to get into China.
No, actually they were 71 on the happiness level, and we were 17.
Oh.
Finally, and I know we're getting really short on time here, but if you could talk about Mexico's president threatening to confiscate American-owned energy companies.
Well, he's doing that because he wants to rebuild a national company, which is Pemex. And at one time, Pemex was the major contributor to the government coffers. And as time went on, it started to deplete because being government-owned, it was government-run, and by being government-run, it was run with corruption and incompetency and efficiency. And the previous president, Obrador, had opened up the energy field to the Americans and other countries. And so Pemex's share went plummeting down, and now he wants to rebuild it up because basically Obrador is a communist or a Marxist. So he believes in state control, and he wants to build it up.
My first thought when I read that was Cuba.
Yeah.
And what happened in Cuba?
Venezuela.
Venezuela.
Yeah. So
Latin America's turning red.
It is turning red. And there's also a limestone company down in Mexico that's been taking limestone out of Mexico for 30 or 40 years, and they've just shut that down. An American company that was doing that, they just said, oh, it's not environmentally sound or something like that. So the trend with the, is it AMLO? AMLO is his nickname. The trend is not good with him either.
And we are going to discuss more on Latin American countries, but our peace through strength solution to this, in your summary, was secure our southern borders. I believe the immigrants should come, but legally.
Yes.
And I don't know your thoughts, but I don't think the U.S. should interfere militarily in Mexico.
Absolutely not. No, I don't believe in military stuff.
I don't think that's the answer at all.
No.
Well, thank you, Larry, for that brief on your article. And to our listeners, you can read all of Larry's articles at www.ascf.us. Subscribe to our newsletter on our website. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Subscribe to our YouTube and Rumble channels through American Security Council Foundation. Thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned for as we continue our discussion on China in Latin America. Thank you.